welcome. You've chosen to step into another time, not through the noisy gates of power and war, but quietly, through the narrow, muddy lanes of the past. Tonight, your guide will not be kings or generals. Instead, imagine yourself walking alongside a humble peasant, a person without armor or title, only a few rough tools, calloused hands, and a hope that tomorrow brings enough bread, enough rest, and, in the time we're exploring tonight, perhaps simply enough breath to survive. Let your body slow down. The pace of the modern world, with its noise, its rush, its glow of screens, begins to fade. The air around you softens. The sounds grow quiet. There is only this voice and the slow unfolding of the past. Now, before we continue, take a moment to notice what time it is where you are. Is it evening? Are the lights dim and the day finally done? Or is it closer to morning, the first signs of light just beginning to rise at the edge of the sky? Whatever the hour, let this story be your stillness. Whether you stay with it to the end or fall asleep along the way, it will carry you gently. The 14th century in Europe was a world heavy with rhythm, the steady cycle of sowing and reaping, of day and night, of feast and famine. It was a life ruled not by personal ambition, but by seasons, soil, and survival. And then the rhythm stopped, or at least it stumbled. Because in the middle of the 1300s, something dark came ashore, the Black Death. It moved not with the sound of marching feet, but with whispers, with coughs, with the creaking of carts that carried the fallen away. But while the world around them trembled, many peasants, poor, uneducated, unarmed, found ways to survive, to adapt, to quietly, stubbornly go on. In this journey, we won't dramatize their pain. We won't race through their stories. We'll take our time, like walking down a worn path after rain. You might find yourself drifting off at times, and that's perfectly all right. This story will still be here, moving gently onward. Let's begin. With a world before the plague, let's settle into the ordinary life of a medieval peasant before everything changed. Picture a small village nestled between soft hills, its cottages low and timber-framed, their thatched roofs golden beneath an overcast sky. The scent of damp straw and wood smoke floats in the air. You hear the low murmur of chickens, the wooden clatter of a bucket in a well, and the rhythmic creak of a cart's wheels passing slowly over rutted dirt. This is the world of the 14th century peasant. Their days began not by clocks, but by light. When the sky grew pale, a woman might rise before her family, stirring a small fire to life with flint and tinder, blowing softly until it flickered. A man might pull on rough woolen garments, stained with work and mended more than once. Children stirred on straw-stuffed mattresses, yawning and brushing away dust or the occasional insect. Their homes were humble, often just 1 or 2 rooms, walls made of wattle and daub, a woven lattice of wooden strips daubed with clay or mud. The floor was usually earth, sometimes covered in rushes or herbs like lavender and mint to mask the smells of living so close to livestock. Many families kept pigs, goats, or chickens under the same roof. Food was simple but nourishing when it could be had. Bread was the heart of most meals, coarse, brown, heavy with bran. Pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables, simmered over the fire, occasionally enriched with a sliver of bacon or a bone for flavor. Ale was safer than water, and children drank it too. A weak, cloudy brew that sustained rather than intoxicated. Work was constant. The rhythm of the seasons determined their tasks. Spring meant plowing and planting. Summer was a time of weeding and tending. Autumn, a season of harvesting and preserving. And in winter, repairs, spinning wool, and simply staying warm. Peasants did not own the land they worked. Most were serfs, bound to a lord's estate. They owed labor, taxes, and a share of their produce in return for protection and a small plot to till. But even here, there was community. Festivals marked the calendar, not holidays as we know them, but holy days. Saints' days offered brief respite, marked by church bells, modest feasting, and dancing when food allowed. Villagers gathered in small chapels, kneeling before simple altars, hearing words in Latin they could not understand, but which comforted them nonetheless. They believed deeply in the spiritual world. Angels, demons, saints, relics. Their worldview was not ruled by science or evidence, but by faith, signs, and divine will. Misfortune might be blamed on sin, or a restless spirit, or a star seen in the wrong part of the sky. Illness, too, was part of life. Coughs and fevers came and went. A broken leg could mean death, yet people endured. Herbal remedies were common. Yarrow, mint, wormwood, gathered by women and passed down through generations. The village midwife or wise woman might carry more healing knowledge than the traveling doctor. And then, sometime around 1347, change arrived, not in the form of soldiers or storms, but in the hold of a ship, in the bite of a flea, in the breath of a stranger. The rhythm of the peasant world, the gentle pulse of their days, would soon be broken. But before we go forward, pause for a moment. Hear the wind moving softly through the trees. Feel the warmth of the fire, the weight of the wooden spoon in your hand, the texture of homespun linen on your skin. Because this life, though humble, was not joyless. There were songs sung while working, laughter around fires, babies born and named. In every corner of the medieval world, even in poverty, there was life. In the next part of our journey, we'll follow the footsteps of the plague itself and trace how it changed everything. But for now, stay here a little longer, where the world still moves with quiet predictability. Imagine the creaking of sails in a distant harbor. It is the autumn of 1347, and a merchant ship pulls into the Sicilian port of Messina. It has traveled from the east, from ports along the Black Sea, where trade moved steadily along the ancient Silk Road. The ship's cargo holds spices, silks, and fine cloth, but also rats, and on the rats, fleas, and inside the fleas, something else entirely, invisible, silent, and unspeakably dangerous. The crew aboard is sick. Some are already dead. Those who unload the ship do not know that this moment is the first ripple of something vast, a wave that will sweep across all of Europe, not in days or even weeks, but slowly, relentlessly. Within a year, the plague will reach France, then Spain, then the Low Countries, Germany, England, Scandinavia. From great cities to the smallest hamlets, it makes no distinction. No man, woman, child, priest, or peasant is beyond its reach. At first, the plague seems like any other illness. Fevers were common. People grew sick and recovered all the time. But then the pattern changes. It begins with a fever, sudden and high, then swellings, painful and large, often near the armpits or groin. People complain of headaches, of confusion. Some vomit, others faint, and within a few days they are gone. Some die faster than that. Some last only a single night. Peasants had no words for bacteria or contagion. They could only watch, wonder, and pray, and perhaps fear each cough, each strange breeze, each newcomer to the village. Word spread not just through messengers, but through absence. A neighboring village goes quiet. The market is cancelled. The roads become still. Sometimes people hear bells tolling far away, more than usual. Sometimes carts arrive at the edges of town carrying goods and bodies. For many, the question became simple. What is this? What is causing so much death? In cities, doctors walked the streets in strange outfits, long robes, glassy goggles, and beaked masks stuffed with herbs. To peasants, they looked like crows, or perhaps like something from a vision. But most villagers would never see such a doctor. Instead, they turned to their own knowledge. Some believed the air was poisoned, that bad smells carried death. To counter this, they lit fires of sweet herbs or burned wood in small braziers. They carried sachets of rosemary or mint or rue. Some hung garlands of flowers in windows and on animals. Sound familiar? There's a little children's rhyme that still echoes this: ring around the rosy. Though its connection to the plague is debated, the sentiment remains. Others believed the plague was a punishment sent from God to correct the world's sin. And if that was true, then survival came through repentance. In cities, groups of flagellants, men dressed in white robes, marched through the streets, whipping themselves in penance. But peasants rarely saw these processions. Instead, they gathered at simple altars, prayed in fields, or fasted. Many walked barefoot to local shrines, hoping a saint might intervene. But others did nothing. They could not leave. They had no means of escape, no horses, no coin, no favor to call upon. So they stayed and watched and waited. Still, not everyone died. Some villages, by sheer chance, were spared. Often, these were more remote places, up in the hills or nestled deep in the forests. The fewer visitors they had, the safer they became. Some families survived because they quarantined instinctively. They shut their doors. They let no one in. They tended only to their own. Others survived by being part of strong communities. When one family fell ill, others brought food and water, left quietly at the door. They shared tools, firewood, and even care of animals. In some places, elders volunteered to help the sick, believing their own lives were closer to ending anyway. In others, women, often midwives or herbalists, did what they could, mixing teas and poultices, using what knowledge they had from centuries of folk wisdom. Not all of it worked, but some of it may have helped. For example, placing damp cloths on foreheads lowered fevers. Certain herbs, like thyme, sage, or garlic, did have mild antimicrobial properties. Boiling water before drinking it may have prevented some illnesses unrelated to plague, keeping people strong enough to resist infection. Time passed differently then. There were no daily newspapers, no town criers delivering numbers, just silence and slow observation. One day you might wake, no footsteps outside, no chatter. The blacksmith's hammer quiet, the fields left unplowed, but slowly, days, then weeks, things might return. The baker's fire lit again, the cows milked, the children, fewer now, begin to play once more. The plague left scars, yes, but it also left survivors. And those survivors, the peasants of Europe, would go on to shape the world that followed. In our next segment, we'll explore the deeper mysteries of this time, the symbols people left behind, the stories, the artwork, the lingering cultural shadows that even now reach across centuries, but for now remain still. Let the quiet wrap around you like a woolen cloak near the hearth. Let your thoughts slow like footsteps through snow. There is more to come, but not just yet. Imagine the world after silence. The worst of the plague has passed through a village. The fields are still dotted with overgrown weeds. The church bell, once constant in its sorrow, now tolls only on Sundays again. Life returns, slowly, uncertainly, but it returns. Yet in the minds of those who survived, the questions remain. What had they just lived through? Why had some perished and others remained? And how could they make sense of a world that no longer made sense? Across Europe, peasants, clerics, artists, and healers began to respond, not with science as we know it today, but with symbols, stories, and silence of their own. Let's begin with belief. For the average peasant, religion was the lens through which all experience was filtered. The church offered not only spiritual guidance, but the calendar, the explanation for every event, and the rituals for every stage of life, from baptism to burial. So when the plague came, most peasants did not ask, "What is this disease?" Instead, they asked, "What have we done to deserve this? Was it pride? Was it war? Was it vanity or gluttony? Was the entire world being punished for its sins?" In this context, even natural events took on deeper meaning. Unusual weather, a red moon, a comet, each became, in their eyes, a sign, a warning, or a confirmation of divine anger. It's no surprise, then, that many turned to saints. Saint Sebastian, often shown pierced with arrows, became a symbol of protection against plague, not because he cured anyone, but because he had suffered silently and survived. Statues of him were placed in churches. Some villagers carved tiny effigies, leaving them near shrines with candles and tears, only to be saved by a dog who brought him bread each day in the forest. To a peasant, this was not just a story, it was hope wrapped in a tale. Let's turn now to medicine, or what passed for it. In cities, learned doctors had theories about humors, corrupted air, and planetary alignments. But few peasants ever consulted such men. Instead, they relied on herbalists, often older women, sometimes feared, sometimes revered. They had books, yes, but many had knowledge simply passed down. Burdock for the blood, chamomile for fever, vinegar for wounds, yarrow and thyme, mashed with wine or fat, spread on the chest. They tied herbs into bundles, worn like amulets or hung above doorways. They recited prayers while mixing remedies, blending faith with folklore. And while much of it could not cure plague, it brought comfort. Mystery also lived in art. Peasant art was not painted on cathedral ceilings or carved into alabaster tombs. It lived in simple carvings, in illustrations, in manuscripts, and on walls of small churches. And what they drew reveals what they feared. The dance of death, or danse macabre, emerged during this time. A powerful image, skeletons dancing hand in hand with kings, with merchants, with peasants. It reminded all that death was the great equalizer. No matter one's wealth or pride, death came dancing, laughing, without discrimination. Peasants, who had long known their lives to be fragile, found grim affirmation in these images. In church murals, two plague themes emerged: angels and demons fighting over the soul of a dying man, saints standing between villagers and looming clouds of black mist, a wheel of fate showing men rising, ruling, falling, and dying. There were also charms and talismans, small lead crosses worn under tunics, scriptures inscribed on scraps of parchment and pinned to the inside of garments. Mass graves were sometimes marked, sometimes not. In some places, the bodies were carefully placed in rows, hands crossed, facing east. In others, they were hurriedly buried together, layers upon layers, like pages in a book. One site in East Smithfield, London, revealed not just the dead, but the living's care. Some bodies had been wrapped, others placed with trinkets, a sign that even in chaos, even amid fear, love endured. And then there were the stories. Oral traditions flourished. Some villages passed down tales of the plague wolf, a spectral creature that stalked the countryside, bringing death in its shadow. Others spoke of a strange traveler in black, with a hood and no face, a figure who knocked on doors and vanished, always before someone inside fell ill. These were not meant to be literal. They were ways of giving shape to the shapeless. A peasant could not describe bacteria, but they could describe a chill wind, a shadow at dusk, a whisper in the field. And even generations later, those tales lived on, woven into lullabies, whispered near firesides. There is something deeply human in this. When faced with mystery and suffering, we turn to meaning. We build it ourselves, from herbs, from prayer, from paint, from story. In this way, peasants were not simply victims of the plague. They were recorders, preservers of a world turned upside down. And they did so not with parchment and ink, but with memory, with myth, and with quiet, enduring ritual. In our final segment, we'll look at what came next, how survival changed the structure of society, what life looked like after the silence began to lift. But for now, let your mind rest. Picture a quiet field, the early sun rising over earth made fallow by absence. A young boy walks behind an ox. A woman kneels in the soil, planting again. Begin again. Imagine, once more, a quiet village. The air carries the scent of soil, turned once again by hand. The sky is pale, and in the distance, a wooden cart creaks across the fields. Its wheels are old, but they move. So, too, does the world slowly, unevenly, but forward. The plague has passed, though not forgotten. Many lives have ended, but many have also continued, forever altered. This is the Europe that peasants now inherit, one of fewer people and more possibilities. Before the plague, there had been certainty in the old systems, rigid though they were. The feudal order was well established. At the top, monarchs and lords, beneath them, knights, clergy, merchants, and at the bottom, the peasantry, working the land, paying taxes, answering to authority. Their role was seen as natural, even divinely ordained. But nature had intervened. When the Black Death reduced Europe's population by as much as half in some regions, it left not only grief, but space, social, economic, and even psychological. The first change was labor. Where once there were too many peasants for the land, now there were too few. Lords, powerful though they were, could not reap the harvests themselves. They needed hands, and hands now were scarce. Many surviving peasants recognized this imbalance. Quietly at first, and then more confidently, they began to ask, "What will you give me if I stay? Why should I remain here when another lord offers more grain, more pay, or freedom from old obligations?" This was a profound shift, not only in power, but in mindset. Some peasants now received wages, where before they had worked only for subsistence and obligation. Others negotiated tenancy agreements, renting land for themselves and deciding what to grow. A few even purchased small parcels of land, becoming, in time, yeomen or independent farmers. For generations, a peasant might have lived and died within a single parish. Now, people moved from manor to manor, even from countryside to town. A subtle mobility took root. Not all lords accepted this change. Many tried to enforce the old rules. In England, for example, the Statute of Labourers in 1351 declared that no one could demand higher wages than they earned before the plague. It was an attempt to freeze time, to restore the balance as it had been. But time, once disturbed, cannot be stilled. Across Europe, similar tensions grew. In France, in Italy, in the German lands, landlords pushed harder, and peasants resisted. And then the unthinkable happened. The peasants fought back. In 1381, in England, this culminated in the Peasants' Revolt, a sweeping protest against taxation, feudal bonds, and inequality. It began with voices, then with marching feet. For a brief moment, common laborers stood in London itself, demanding change. Though the rebellion was crushed, its echo lingered, not in violence, but in memory, in policy, in culture. Peasants began to expect more, and in time, lords had little choice but to give more. Beyond economics, the psychological landscape also shifted. To survive the Black Death was to confront mortality in the most immediate, intimate way. Entire families gone, fields empty, churchyards full. For many, this sharpened their sense of individual meaning. Where the medieval world had once emphasized collective identity, your family, your class, your parish, post-plague thought gave rise to something more personal, a sense of self, of agency, and with it, a new form of religious reflection. Some peasants turned toward mysticism, quiet, contemplative prayer, sometimes outside formal church structures. Small movements arose. Local saints, miracle visions, personal acts of penitence and devotion. Others questioned more, not in defiance, but in wonder. Why had God spared some and not others? Was suffering truly a punishment, or simply part of life? These thoughts seeded change that would, over centuries, blossom into reform, into revolution, into philosophy. Meanwhile, the nobility, the lords, who had once held unchallenged control, found their estates stretched thin. Some turned their lands into pasture, needing fewer workers and seeking profit from wool. Others sold off parcels to rising townsfolk or wealthy peasants. The manor, once the engine of feudal Europe, began to fragment. The church, too, changed. Having lost so many clergy during the plague years, it recruited quickly. Standards slipped, trust eroded. Some peasants began to view the church not only as sacred, but as fallible, a human institution, not an untouchable one. By the 1400s, we see the earliest murmurs of reform, and at its heart, again, were the people who lived closest to the earth, the peasantry. Their knowledge grew more valuable. They were no longer simply laborers. They became tenants, traders, citizens, and through it all, they retained the same rhythms, tending sheep, boiling porridge, telling stories by firelight. But now, their place in the world had shifted, subtly but permanently. The plague had not only taken, it had also revealed. It revealed how fragile the old systems truly were. It revealed that change could come, even in the quietest of places, even through the humblest of lives. And in that revelation, the seeds of modern Europe were sown. And now we return, slowly, gently, to where we began, to a quiet lane, a flickering hearth, to the sound of a wooden door closing softly against the wind. You've traveled far tonight, from the rhythm of peasant life to the chaos of plague, from whispered prayers and bundles of herbs to a world slowly reshaped by survival. Perhaps you're still awake, or perhaps your thoughts have already begun to drift, like smoke curling upward from an evening fire. Either way, you're exactly where you need to be. Let this story settle into you like layers of soft earth, not heavy, but grounding, not loud, but lasting, because even the quietest lives leave echoes. The peasants of the Black Death did not write books. They did not build cathedrals, but they endured. And in their endurance, they reshaped history, gently, steadily, permanently. And so, as you rest, know that every age, even one touched by great darkness, carries with it resilience, hope, and the soft persistence of ordinary people. The world turns, the fields are planted again, the bell tolls for weddings as well as for loss, and life always finds its way forward. Sleep well, you are safe now, and the past can rest too.